I frame it as my understanding of science, physics, thermodynamics, and economics. It is clear that the climate is changing. And if you look at carbon dioxide levels before the Industrial Revolution, they were about 150 parts per million. Today, carbon dioxide in our environment, even though it's a very small component of our atmosphere, is actually risen about 50% to approximately 220 parts per million. I'm happy to look up those numbers again. I'm pretty sure the increase is about 50%, and yeah, please Google it. I don't mind being corrected. But really the bottom line is that there's been an increase, significant increase since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And the question is, what is it that we should do as a response? And there are some really difficult truths that have to be discussed. If the United States went to a zero carbon economy, which by the way would utterly destroy and impoverish the middle class, but if we went to a zero carbon economy, it wouldn't make any difference in the CO2 levels in our atmosphere. China today is commissioning a coal-fired power plant almost every week. And so you may know that we share an atmosphere, right? There's no, the pollution in China does not stay in China. And this is true, by the way, not just in China, but the rest of the world. And so while we continue to take on these issues that are causing inflation, these policies that are driving up costs for working Americans, we're actually not making a difference in the overall CO2 levels in the world, in our atmosphere. We can do it all the way to zero and still not actually have moved the needle. And so it does come down to, well, what is it that we can do? And I think from an energy perspective, there's really four fundamental things about energy. It should be reliable. It should be resilient. We live in a harsh winter climate here. Do any of you want to go without electricity, for 4 days in the winter? I suspect not. So reliable, resilient, it's affordable, particularly for families that are, again, living each month very close. And by the way, that's the majority. Particularly in this district, it's more than the majority. And it also has to be responsible, right? We've phased out, to a large extent, coal-fired plants. Now it comes back to a question of how do we provide energy? And I'm just going to go through some things. You have to have what's called a base load. And a base load is just, no matter, that we are providing this much power on a day-to-day basis, 24/7. The best sources for that are hydro, which we get from Niagara, nuclear, and natural gas. And that's, we're also getting solar and wind, but solar and wind is not steady. You may have noticed that it gets dark here, even here it gets dark, that the wind doesn't blow all the time. And so because of that, we can't tell everybody, don't go home and turn on your heater or turn on your air conditioner or your television until the wind starts blowing. You understand that that's not possible, okay? And so you get to a class of power that's called dispatchable power, okay? Dispatchable power is what you can turn on and off. And dispatchable power almost exclusively comes from natural gas. And here's why. Natural gas is burned in a jet engine. It's almost identical to a jet engine that are on airplanes. And instead of tied to a big ducted fan, it's actually tied to a generator. And that's where natural gas is used to provide electricity. Now you may know when you get on an airplane, you're not sitting there for 2.5 days on the tarmac waiting for the pilot to warm up the engine so we can go. You hear them turn them on, they come up to temperature, they check all the pressures, and off you go in about 10 or 15 minutes. You need to be able to bring on electric generation in the winter, particularly here, on a really cold day, or on a really hot day in the summer when everybody comes home from school or from work at 4 p.m. and turns on their air conditioners, which is increasingly common here. And if you don't have that, we're going to have brownouts here. Okay? Let me tell you what happens in brownouts. We have companies that we're hoping to lure here, like Micron, that in part they come here because there is reliable power. And you're not going to invest $100 billion in a chip manufacturing if you think the power is going to go off. No one would invest in that kind of environment and make that here. And so we have to have a mix. We have to have a good base load, and I would advocate for a responsible, an environmentally responsible base load, which include nuclear and natural gas. We can have renewables. I spent the day actually looking at the construction of a transmission line. In New York State, the demand for power is not nearby where it's generated. So we have a lot of wind and solar farms being built up in the North Country, and we have these giant transmission lines that go where? New York City. And they, by the way, they go right through here, but they go right past here. And so, you know, they're using our land up here to provide energy down in New York City. This is a lot of wind and solar. And all of the communities around here, I spent the day talking to a few, and the communities around here would need enormous amounts of investment to, for example, make all the buses electric, right? You don't just make, making the buses electric in this one town would actually double the use of energy that the whole town uses in the hours that they use power charging up these buses. Where is that generation capacity going to come from? And more importantly, they don't have it, but even more importantly, they don't have the transmission and distribution lines to be able to, even if you could generate it, you can't transport it to wherever it is you're charging these buses, for example. Unless you want all of the residents of that town paying 2 or 3 times the amount of money that they're currently paying for power. So when you think about this, remember when I gave my introduction, I told you these are complex issues. They're not political issues. They're issues about physics, science, thermodynamics, and economics. And the decisions that we're making are not being made with those things in mind, and they're not being made with our community in mind. And we really have to take a stand to make sure that we're doing common sense things that work for us. So these are common sense things. Getting back to photosynthesis again, I want to make sure I answer all of the questions. I think we all learned in science class that plants take carbon dioxide out of the air through the process of photosynthesis, and they actually store it in the ground. There's a lot of science being done around this. Since we can't control how much other countries produce of CO2, actually one of the things that we can do is have a program to grow more trees, to grow more cover crops in the winter, green cover crops that continue to participate in photosynthesis to stop soil erosion so that we're not losing the tillable land, or even just the land that will support trees and plants, to stop desertification or the growing. You might have seen the tremendous droughts until recently out in the West and in California. The deserts are encroaching, and where there are deserts, by definition, there is very little vegetation growth. And so these, by the way, are right out of the environmental playbook of the last 70 years. And these are things that we should be doing. We should be saving the Amazon rainforest and promoting these huge swaths of green and photosynthesis that are threatened in South America. There's an area on the southern part of the Sahara Desert called the Sahel, and I've actually been there in areas of Mali near Timbuktu. I was there with World Vision, and there were communities that were involved in trying to do exactly these things, not to save the planet, but just to save their communities from being overrun by the Sahara Desert. And there's enormous greenbelt projects happening in the Sahel region of Africa that we should be supporting. And this idea that we can all buy electric vehicles and feel good about ourselves is actually not going to solve the problem. And I say that as these may sound like political issues, and I can't tell you how frustrated I get that I hear simple jargon that pretend to address these critical issues, and the decisions we're making are hurting people here in Central New York. And we can't allow that, and that's part of why I'm here.